Started. All right, so I'd like to welcome everybody to the meet and greet. Welcome to my colleagues and welcome to our students who are here. Hope everyone's having a good week and that the heat isn't killing you like it's been killing me as I do housework around the house also this week. The itinerary for this event is pretty straightforward. We are scheduled to go up until 11:30, but we probably won't go that long unless there are a lot of questions at the end. So each of us, myself and my colleagues, will introduce ourselves one at a time, and we'll talk about our classes. We'll save any questions from students until the very end. If you prefer to type your question rather than say it out loud, just go ahead and type it into the chat, and I will keep track of questions and make sure that all the questions get asked at the end. Yeah, and I think that's how we'll run things. So Robert or Jill, would either of you prefer to go first? Because I know you have to head out at 11. So,
would you like to, Jill? No, you want me to go? Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Robert Peluso. I'm a professor here at Mount SAC. I teach composition, critical thinking, intro to cinema sometimes, and this semester I'm teaching fiction writing and intro to mythology. Our fiction writing class is 8A, which I'd like to talk about a little bit today. And I just love, it's an absolute dream come true to teach this course every semester I do. I've been teaching it about six years now, something like that. I have a Master of Arts in English, Master of Fine Arts in writing for screen and television. So my understanding of language is usually biased from a visual standpoint, which I think is usually okay because we live in such a heavily visual culture. But I'm really interested in exploring the ways that that words can perform in ways that images can't. So I always love to explore that. One of the first things that we do on the first day of my fiction writing class is I ask the students to help me finish the syllabus by everybody contributing their own definition of what makes for good writing. And so from that perspective, we all get to kind of have an understanding of what we as individuals are looking to accomplish with our writing, and to kind of get a community consensus going that is drawing strength from the diversity and variety of ideas in the class. I teach it in kind of a workshop format where over the course of 10 weeks in the middle of the semester, we have each week 3 star writers that come from the class, and each of those 3 students shares their story their original story that they've written and signed up to have peer reviewed that week. And then we go over how the story impacted us, what our impressions were of the story. The discussion is led by some peer reviewers that are from the class. I kind of guide the discussion, and then we get the writers' responses to that process. And then in addition to crafting at least one original full short story, I also assign 2 different assignments. One's called a craft paragraph, where from assigned stories from some classic writers of short fiction, the student will choose an area of fiction like setting or dialogue or theme, and just focus on that one area and write one paragraph about that, how that element of fiction manifests in the particular short story. So they get to self-direct which of those elements of craft that they want to focus on for that story. And so we get a great variety of the kinds of responses each week for those classic stories. So that's one of them. Those are the craft paragraphs. And then the other thing that I'm doing, and I've got a whole new litany of prompts because my students in the past have really liked doing these. And so some semesters I don't do them as much, but this semester I'm really going back hardcore on these. I've got 10 new prompts for what I like to call, kind of sketches. And each one is about a page, and it's kind of a writing prompt where for that one page, the student can do a character sketch where it's in words, it's all in words, but about a particular person that they want to write about or are thinking about writing a story about. So it's a whole kind of portrait in words of a character. Another one is a setting sketch where it's a description of an environment, about one page. And the limits I find are really helpful too. Limits combined with radical lack of direction. So there's no way to do it wrong. It takes a couple of weeks for students to kind of wrap their heads around that. And then I'm like, nope, you got to pull directions out of me. I'm not inclined to give them. As long as you've got words on the page and it adds up to a page, full credit for that. So I'm very, very excited to be back teaching English 8A this semester, and I hope folks will consider taking that with me sometime in the future. We offer it once a semester in the fall and in the spring. Did I do okay, Lloyd?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Thank you so much for that. Jill, would you like to go next?
Sure, I'd love to. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see both colleagues and students here on the Zoom. I'm Jill Goldwright, and I have to kind of reticently admit that I'm like the grandmother on this call. I think maybe I've been in the department longer than everybody else on the call. I am entering my 24th full-time year and my 25th year on campus at Mount SAC. If you're trying to do the mental math on that, it's because I got hired when I was 12, and that's how all of that works out. So just in case you were wondering. I have a long and wonderful history of teaching lit classes at on our campus, but I'd just like to focus on a few of them today. One of them is Lit 10, which is Survey of Shakespeare, which is a phenomenal class. And in fact, the only single author class that we teach in the English department. You'll find that later, if you transfer to a four-year university or a graduate program, oftentimes there'll be, an entire class on Mark Twain or an entire class on Steinbeck or something like that. But the only single author class that we offer at Mount SAC is one surrounding the works of William Shakespeare. There are a few of us in the English department who love to teach this class. And I know that I and my colleagues who teach it do it quite differently. I have less of a focus on Shakespeare's non-dramatic works. We spend like just a week or two on the sonnets and spend most of our time on the plays. And specifically, I've done quite an amount of work on performance theory and kind of original practice. And so I spent a lot of time talking about the space. I spent a lot of time talking about both the Blackfriars and the Outdoor Globe Theatre in London, where Shakespeare wrote and performed. And so we spent a lot of time kind of talking about original practice and how our understanding of original practice has to do with our understanding of the reading of the plays. So traditionally in that class, I do 2 comedies, 2 tragedies, and 2 histories as just kind of a smorgasbord of the class, and it's always a ton of fun. I also traditionally, certainly in times before the pandemic, would always arrange a theater trip with the students to go see something, some Shakespeare production playing somewhere in the greater Los Angeles area, and it's never too hard to find one. So that's that's been phenomenal. Another one of the classes that I really love to teach is Lit 14, which is modern poetry. And with that class, I really focus on American poets, not because I think that Americans are the only ones who are poets, and not because I think that English is the only language in which poetry is written. Clearly, neither of those things is true. But with a 16-week semester, which then turns out to be about 14 weeks, which then turns out to be about 13 and a half weeks or so, it gets very difficult to try to cover the entire modern age in all languages and in all lands where there are poetic voices. And so Robert, you were talking about boundaries. I always feel restricted by the boundaries that I put around the syllabi just because I know I have to. But within the American poetry, I try to bring up lots of important voices. So we usually start with the modernists, with Frost and with Eliot, who is an American poet, even though he pretended that he wasn't. And then I like to move all the way up into the 21st century and end with living poets, slam poets, and often try to bring a poet into class to kind of talk about their experience. I will say that it's not a poetry writing class. It's not a creative writing class. It's the study of poetry. And I always have a lot of fun bringing in as many different voices as I can, from, you know, all racial, gender, religious, immigration status, LGBTQ. Like, I just try to bring it all in. Again, in 13 and a half weeks, it's more representative than comprehensive, but it's always a lot of fun. And while I'm talking about the multicultural experience in literature, the other one that I wanted to talk about is Lit 3, which we call Multiculti Lit. And I'm not just talking about culture in the kind of more traditional sense, but I really try to broaden what culture means. It's almost multi-community lit that I like to try to address. So we focus on Asian American, African American, and Latinx writers, but I bring in lots of voices, East Asian voices. I bring in Jewish American voices. I bring in LGBTQ plus voices. I bring in older, more canonical writers. I bring in lesser known writers. And I try to, again, give a lot of representation to a lot of different voices. I've also done some work with the deaf and hard of hearing population. And so I sometimes bring in deaf writers as well. That's what I meant by multicultural. It's not just kind of the traditional, but it's a newer definition of what culture means. In that class, I focus mostly on, we do prose and poetry and drama, but maybe I've given myself away. Drama is my specialty. And so I spend a lot of time with American playwrights, multicultural American playwrights in that class. So in the past, I've taught Lorraine Hansberry's Raisin in the Sun. I've taught August Wilson's Fences. I've taught Luis Valdez's Zoot Suit. I've taught Tony Kushner's Angels in America. And so quite popular and well-known and canonical texts, but ones that I think beautifully kind of tangle with questions of identity and culture and community in the United States of America. Oh, David Henry Huang's short plays, Trying to Find Chinatown. I mean, I do a ton of stuff. So anyway, I guess that's me. I'd love to answer any questions or introduce any more after everybody else has spoken. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jill. One thing that you brought up really quickly that I think is true for all of us in the department and probably everywhere really, is how with our lit and creative writing classes, how we get to, one of the joys of it, one of the things that we love about it is we get to teach the things that the writers and the texts that we love. Like you gravitate towards drama and I gravitate towards poetry or graphic novels, and finding ways to actually celebrate those in the classes that we teach is just a really cool thing. Would anyone like to go next? Christina, go for it.
Sure, thanks. All right, glad to have you here, the students who are here, and then my colleagues as well. So this fall, I am teaching both Literature 1, and that's good. I have 2 sections of that, and they're both asynchronous online. And then I'm teaching a face-to-face children's literature course. So I want to spend most of my time today talking about the children's lit course. I'm an Americanist, so I teach Lit 1 and Lit 2. So Lit 1 being the first half of American Lit and Lit 2 the second half, nearly every time they're offered. But children's lit is something that I became a lover of, I guess, when I first started teaching here at Mount SAC and had the opportunity to teach that course. And it's probably been the course that I teach that is the most pliable and flexible in terms of what I have my students read. So like Professor Goldwright said, and I think Professor Peluso may have mentioned it as well, one of the goals that I have as a professor and my colleagues as well is to ensure that we are representative, our works that our students are reading are representative of a variety of voices. And that's especially important, I think, when I'm teaching students who take children's lit. There are students there who are English majors. There are students who are taking it for credit in the humanities for general ed. And I do have a lot of students in that class who want to become elementary school teachers or high school teachers. And it's important to illustrate to them that we do need to widen our perspective of what we're giving our students because their experiences are very different from the ones that we've gone through perhaps in our lives. So in that class, we start all the way from picture books. And one of my favorite days is in week 2, when I have students bring in a picture book that they either liked as a child or, you know, that they ran to the library at Mount SAC and picked up very quickly before class, and share those and talk a little bit about why they, what their experiences were with those texts, if they have experiences. Some students come in and say, I wasn't read to as a child, I didn't have experiences with books, which is perfectly fine. Every experience is valid. But we do start there looking at how we give literacy or project literacy at all stages of life. Then we move into some classical works. So we do The Wizard of Oz and we do Alice in Wonderland. And I actually teach those one right after the other. And then we do some work with synthesis and evaluation and looking at how these 2 works are similar and different, talking both about the works themselves as well as their writers. And then we move into some more contemporary work. And that's where I like to ensure that my students are getting voices that look like them or voices that sound like them, voices that ensure that they can make connections with something, which is what we certainly need to do, especially when we're looking at children's literature. One of the things I do in my class too is I always choose a text that I've never read and I read it along with my students. And I do that in every single class that I teach. And sometimes it's a novel, sometimes it's a poem, but I don't read it ahead. I don't read it until my students are reading it with the class. And so one of the things that you'll learn about in Children's Lit is the Fair Education Act in California. And the Fair Education Act, which was passed signed into law in 2011 and went into effect on January 1st of 2012, illustrates that we must ensure that when we have texts that we're using in high schools and that sort of thing, that we represent both writers of disability as different areas of disability, as well as the LGBTQ plus community. And so I have 2 books that my students read. One of them is called Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. And the interesting thing about that one, there are a lot of interesting things, but I had a student a few semesters ago who came into class so excited because apparently Lin-Manuel Miranda reads the audiobook of that. And so I always tell my students that because if they like Lin-Manuel Miranda, then they want to use the audiobook and they get very excited. So I use that one by Benjamin Saenz. There's actually, I think it's being made into a movie right now, and there's a sequel to that text that just came out about a Latinx young man who is of the LGBTQ+ community. And then a new one that I can't tell you what it's about specifically because I haven't read it yet, is called The Black Flamingo, and it's by Dean Atta. And it's about a Black teenager who is transgender and how she has to deal with, you know, both the color of her skin as well as her sexual or gender identity. And again, I don't know specifics about it because I haven't read it yet. I'll be reading that along with my students, which I think is a benefit both to them and to me. But I look forward to that children's literature course. There are still some spaces in children's literature. So if you've taken and passed English 1A and you'd like to sign up for it, you're welcome to. It is a face-to-face class. But as well, one other thing that I'll add is that even in a face-to-face, I use discussion boards on Canvas for students to complete their homework assignments. And I do that because if students complete their homework regularly, you know, like on a sheet of paper, they print it out and they give it to me, I'm going to get the benefit of that student's perspective on the work. But if I have students submit via the discussion boards, then both I'm getting the benefit of their perspective as well as every other student in the class can take a look. So that's something that I use even in my face-to-face classes to ensure that we're getting that variety. Every student in a classroom has a different knowledge base, has different experience. And I could stand in front of the room and tell y'all what I think or how I am affected by a piece of literature or how I interpret it based on my knowledge and experience. But not everybody in that room is a middle-aged white woman. So by allowing my students to give their perspectives as well and to hear from other people who are both similar and different than they, that's going to give them the most well-rounded, I think, benefit of the course. And then finally, the last thing I'll say is that in every class I teach, it's not my class, it's not my course, it is our course, meaning every student who's in there takes ownership in that course as well, and propelling it and the literature forward as we navigate it. So that's me, Christina Allende, and again, I'm teaching Lit 1, but with my time here, I wanted to talk about the Lit 40 children's literature that I'm teaching this fall. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. Would anyone like to go next?
I think I'm up.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Hi, all. Like Professor Wright here, I'm going to be teaching Lit 14, which is the Introduction to Modern Poetry. And that's my first time teaching this. I'm really excited. And Professor Wright, I might be hitting you up for some help with that too at some point. So I'm begging. I have a reading list. This is sort of a survey class for majors, but not just for them, of course. The first question, two questions, of course, immediately are what's so modern about modern poetry, since poetry's been around forever, basically. And of course, what do we mean when we say modern anyway? So we're going to be thinking about those kind of things. This class is going to be in some ways sort of a greatest hits collection. This is the kind of poetry which we call canonical poetry, in part at least, which is the kind of thing that English majors in particular, but not others, not all, again, will be expected to know, or at least have some degree of passing familiarity with. I have not read some of these poems in many, many years, so I'm looking forward to going back to them. Others are old friends. I was fortunate enough to study under several poets, mostly as an undergraduate, including Richard Shelton and Tenny Nathanson, who was a member of what we call the Language School of Poetry, Joy Harjo, who was just the Poet Laureate of the United States of America, and a number of others. My background is in comparative literature, which in contrast to my colleagues, I think is much better than English because it's a verb, not a noun. So we compare things. So I'm hoping that in our class, we will look at many different voices. Want to echo what Professor Wright had to say here, especially as modern poetry has become much more expansive, even in what we call these canonical examples. Many, many new voices are entering what we call the canon, the sort of like, highly acclaimed work. I've also been fortunate to meet some of these poets, such as Adrienne Rich, who was a great voice for the lesbian community, and W.S. Merwin, wonderful, amazing modern poet, one of my very favorites. The class is going to work through some of these, and then I also want students to bring in some things. I've assigned an extraordinarily expensive anthology of poetry. So if you're having trouble buying it, please let me know. I'll try to get some help for you with that. But the anthology ends around the turn of the century. So I'm going to be asking my students to please bring in some new voices and poets to bring our anthology up to date. And I also want to point out to any students who might be here and your friends that lots and lots of people who think that they don't love poetry actually love poetry very much, but you don't call it that, you call it music. And I'm going to be asking people to bring in some lyrics, that's poem people, of some of your favorite songs so that we can take a look at those. We will also do a little bit of work on some basic ways of interpreting poets. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the classic interpretive theories of literature, such as Marxism and feminism, psychoanalysis, and so on. We're not going to be getting into that into a whole lot of detail, but it's amazing what you can do with even a little bit once you kind of tune your ears in to the power and importance of things like class or gender and sex and race. All of these things play a crucial role, not only when they're there, but also when they're not there, which is really, really important. So I want my students to learn to be alert to the things that are unsaid in some of these poems and just taken for granted. And that's a really important feature of the kinds of poems that we're going to be looking at too. Okay, I don't think I have too much more to add. We'll have 2 essays to do, and then I'll have some little things for us to do along the way. The 2 essays will be pretty open-ended. I'll be asking you to pick a poet and several poems to write about, or you can pick a couple of poets and compare and contrast things. Pretty straightforward as far as that goes. And I'll provide an option also for you to give me a rough draft and get lots of feedback from me. I really love engaging with student writing and really want to see what you can do and help you to expand what you're thinking about and push it in all kinds of interesting ways, I hope. Anyway, that's my pitch. We're meeting in person on Monday and Wednesday afternoons at Mount SAC. Please come and join us.
Thank you so much. Maria, would you like to go next or do you want me to go?
Sure, I'll go. Hi, everyone. I'm Maria Estrada. I've been teaching at Mount SAC a long time, many years. I will be teaching Lit 25, which is Mexican American literature this fall, and the class is fully online. Okay, it's online, asynchronous, so we won't have any required class meetings. So in Lit 25, students mostly read novels, and I also assign some short stories and poems. Some examples of the readings that I use are The Moths and Other Stories by Helena Viramontes. I'm also using Across the 100 Mountains by Reina Grande. And for the first time, Christina, I thought of you. Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Sáenz. And I'm really excited. I have to hear that audio recording by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think that's really cool. And I'll tell my students about it now that I know. Luis Rodriguez's Always Running, and also Sandra Cisneros' Woman Hollering Creek, which is a collection of poetry. Tomas Rivera's And the Earth Did Not Devour Him, and Carla Trujillo's What Night Brings. And finally, we're going to end with Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya. I also assigned some poems by Gary Soto, A Red Palm, and a long epic poem by Corky Gonzalez, I Am Joaquin, as well as a couple of movies. I post some movies on on my modules, and students can watch them on Canvas. Zoot Suit, which I think Jill does in one of her classes, they watch the movie and we talk about it. We do discussion board posts, students do journals on it, and like Water for Chocolate as well is the second movie I use. So as for assignments, students will be writing weekly journals and discussion board posts. They have 2 essays along with a midterm exam and a final exam. So my background in history and teaching this class, I've been teaching it since 2014 and mostly in person. I've done it lots of times in person. The last time I taught the class was fall of 2020, and that was fully online. And so when I first started teaching the class, I've always loved Mexican American literature, but I had to do a lot of research to discuss, decide which books I was going to use. And right now I'm really happy with my current reading list. I have a couple of new books that I've never done before, like Aristotle and Dante. So I have some work to do to prepare. What I really love about teaching the class is introducing my students to new Mexican American authors, authors they may not have heard about. So most people have heard about Sandra Cisneros. Everyone knows her, has heard of her, has read something by her. But I also like teaching lesser known authors like Carla Trujillo and Reina Grande, and introducing my students to their works. And I also like showing my students some common themes in Mexican American literature, like identity and discrimination and religion and class and racism. And I always bring in stuff about the authors. So when I do my lesson plans and I make my videos, I always talk about the authors and their backgrounds and how their backgrounds influence their writing and their art. And so each of my lesson plans contains a biography of their work or of their lives. And that's it. My class, I'm teaching the class in the fall. And right now it's at 30, but the wait list is open. So if any of you are interested, and I have some no-shows, I'd be happy to, have you on the wait list and maybe add you to the class. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. So I guess I'll round out the presentation. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick here. History of forever, and I put this together this morning, so apologies if it's not that great. And hopefully it loads up. Oh, well, we might have to do it. Okay, there we go. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm noticing a little bit of lag on my video. So I teach primarily the English 8B creative writing poetry class, which is offered every fall semester. What's really great about English 8B for students is that there's no experience necessary. If you've never written a poem before in your life, or if the only poems you've ever written were back in grade school, which was kind of my experience before I started really getting serious about poetry in college, we welcome everybody. And the class is really geared towards beginners as well as people who are more advanced in terms of their poetry. Since even though there is, like as a couple of my colleagues have already mentioned, thousands of years of poetry to work with, we focus primarily on studying the work of contemporary poets who are currently writing today. We read 4 poetry collections, and I also bring in every day a new poet and a new poem, just to kind of introduce students to the community of poetry that's currently alive and thriving around us today. The 4 poetry collections are for this semester are from writers such as Nate Marshall, Natalie Diaz, Ocean Vuong, and Michael Torres, who is a graduate of our creative writing program and is now becoming a very famous poet. Our focus is on craft because it is a creative writing class. So while we are studying the works of contemporary poets, we are looking at how they are able to move readers by the way that they shape images, words, and sound on the page. So we study contemporary poets. We look at the choices that they make, the tools and techniques that they use. I have students write craft paragraphs about our 4 primary collections, looking at things like their use of rhyme or their use of line breaks, the specific poetic style or form that they're working with. In terms of the actual writing, of poetry for the class, unless there is like a holiday or something in the week, we write 2 poems a week. So at the end of the semester, students will have written anywhere between 25 to 30 poems total, which is fantastic. That's almost all the way towards a full collection at that point, which is really, really great. And we explore all different types and styles and forms of poetry. As I mentioned, we focus on poetic craft and technique. And one thing I don't dictate after the first 2 assignments, poetry assignments, is I don't dictate what students write about in terms of content. Students can write about whatever they want to write about, as long as they are writing either the type of poem or following the craft or technique instructions. So like for this particular poem assignment, you have to use this particular rhyme scheme, but it can be about whatever you want it to be about. And the last thing that I think is really great about the class for students is that you can't really fail the class as long as you're just writing poetry. I always tell students that the worst thing that can happen if they ever write is that they've written a poem at the end of the process. Now, it may not be a good poem, but they've written a poem, and that's fantastic. That's great. Why I love teaching in class, let me give you a little bit of my background. I started writing poetry at age 20, and at this point now I've published over 100 poems throughout the years. I've been teaching at Mount SAC for 18 years now, and have 20 years of teaching experience total. This particular class, English 8B, I started teaching back in 2014, so almost 10 years now. I'm a big member of the creative writing portion of our department. I've been in the past one of the faculty advisors for the Creative Writing Club when it's been up and operating. I am the current coordinator of Culturama, which is, we organize a year-long series of events on campus, online, which are meant to bring professional artists, writers together with our students, with workshops, readings, events like that. We'll be having our big Culturama event this fall in November. We're still working out the details of that. The biggest reason why I love teaching creative writing poetry is that from the very first time I stepped on campus, I was amazed by how amazing our students are at writing. They're just amazing poets, and they have been for all the 18 years that I've been teaching at our college. I'm blown away by how fantastic our students are at writing poetry. There's also just the simple joy of seeing poets grow throughout the semester. You have students who are writing in a very specific style at the beginning of the semester, and then to see that style and that voice grow and change over the course of 15 weeks is just an amazing thing. I love just exposing my students to the work of contemporary poets and introducing them to here's what people are doing and what people are talking about and how they're talking about things today. And look at all this amazing work that people are doing that you can be a part of, which also leads sometimes to students entering into that community themselves, whether it's joining a writing group or going to a poetry reading and reading their work at an open mic, or working on a literary magazine, or even in some cases going for an MFA in creative writing and publishing their own poetry. All of that is just really, really great to see, and it makes their work really, really rewarding. So yeah, that's English 8B. Let me go ahead and stop the share. Looks like we only got one person left with us. So Blanca, do you have any questions for any of us?
No, and I will. Okay, well, thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome.
You're welcome.
Hope you found this.
Welcome, Blanca.
You're most welcome.
This is something, by the way, Blanca, and for anyone who watches this recording later on, this is something that we would like to do, continue to do in the future. Definitely next spring. I'll be inviting my colleagues to do something more, something similar to this. Hopefully we can do it in person next time, depending on how the world goes, I guess. If not, we always have Zoom to fall back on. And like I said, in the next couple of days, hopefully this will get posted somewhere on the department website, and I'll email everybody, including students as well, to let them know where to find this video. Thanks to all of you for taking the time to come in and talk a little bit about the class or hear about the classes that we teach.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. Have a good rest of the week, guys. And I'll see you
Thanks,
Alright.
you guys too. See you
on
next week.
Friday, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, Friday, yeah. Friday.
Friday.
Good luck to everybody.
Friday.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.